And we're back. All right. So we just talked about something from The Lion King. No. We talked about Malacca, right? That was the last thing we said. So now that we got the iPad up and running again. So Mediterranean Sea, I don't think we need to say anything else about, right? Trans-Saharan trade routes were good. Silk Road. We can just mention that at the beginning of, this is for the whole entire period. So during this period, during period 3, Silk Road network will, we said this before, but they will decline a bit. After the fall of the Han Dynasty in 200, the Silk Road will become a little bit less stable, and of course it's called the Roman Empire. When those empires collapse, the stability that they provide to the trade decreases. But with the revitalization of empires, particularly the Mongols, in the Pax Mongolica, that helps the Silk Road to make a comeback around around the 1300s, 1400s. And in between that, the Indian Ocean trade was really the big fish in the pond, as you said. I don't know if anyone knows that. Communication and exchange networks developed in the Americas. There's one that comes to mind that I think is worth we're sharing here, and that is the beautiful road systems that were developed by the Inca Empire. Because not only were they roads, let's see if I have a picture of the road. Right? You have this. To think of the bridge system, because remember, the Inca Empire was incredibly mountainous, right? It's in the Andes Mountains in South America, and it's very difficult to move. Mobility is difficult in a mountainous region, but they were able to overcome that with an elaborate system of roads and bridges. And in addition to that, they had runners, similar to what we saw in the Persian Empire. We talked about the kind of Pony Express mail system. Didn't make it to the video, but we talked about it last time. They have a similar system of runners. Of course, they don't have ponies because
there's no horses.
There's no horses, none of those animals except for alpacas and llamas. Not the greatest for. So they have runners that run up and down the roads and are able to deliver messages. But how do they deliver messages if they can't write things down?
Quipu.
The Quipu! Oh yes, this guy over here. The Quipu. Do you guys remember the Quipu? I don't think I have a picture of it. But it was, rather than having a writing system, they had these strings, knots tied to them, and it was a kind of a way of encoding information, not quite as, couldn't get quite the detail you could with writing, but still a way of recording information, kind of more of a memory system than a full-on writing system. But that helps. So that's one I would mention for that. We mentioned last time with the Americas some trade connections between people in the Mississippi River region and in Central America, but that's the one that comes to mind for this period, for the end of period 3, really right before the European show up. The growth of interregional trade in luxury goods was encouraged by significant innovations in previously existing transportation and commercial technologies, including caravanserai, compass use, astrolabe, larger ship designs and sea travel, and new forms of credit, and the development of the money economy. It's amazing how one point to the next is so different in the amount of information they try to put in there. You tell me, which ones do you want to focus on here? What do you need to know about? You guys know caravanserai? Yeah. Wow, I'm way too close to the screen right now. This is weird. What's caravanserai?
When the traders, when their camels, that was like the stop off, really.
It was like motels.
Yeah, like a camel motel, right? So you would stop off, and so a caravan, right, is the large groups of people that travel together, usually for like their own protection and just sharing resources, supplies, things like that. And yeah, it was a place for them to stop off along the Silk Road, and also that's primarily where we think of it. That makes me want to go back to Silk Road, but if I have a picture of it, I'll say it. So Silk Road network, there are some important cities during Islamic age, like Samarkand and Bukhara. There were also Silk Road centers. You guys remember last year when I showed you the thing from the Museum of Natural History with Aladdin?
Oh
messed up thing where they had an Aladdin floating in like the top of the city. That city that it was in, that was I believe it was Bukhara, in what is today Uzbekistan. That was that was a major city along the Silk Road, and that's one of the cities that falls in that example I was saying before, where there's not really too much around. There are rivers in the region, but it's not like a super. It's not really fertile area or anything like that. Its primary purpose was as a center of trade, and so some of those cities, Central Asian cities, are important trade centers. So just thinking about for point A. But going back to this one, we mentioned caravanserai, compass use, and the astrolabe. So astrolabe is earlier than the compass. Astrolabe is. Anyone know what astrolabe does? You know what it looks like?
Isn't it with like the stars?
Yeah, it's a star navigation tool. You know, during the day, what can you use to navigate and find your direction if you don't have a compass?
The sun.
Yeah, you can get a rough idea from looking at the sun. But at night, you need to figure out which way you're going. And so we have something called the astrolabe. Just throw up some nice images here from Google. So it has this patterns on it, and you can kind of read the stars and use where the stars are in this night sky in order to locate yourself and get direction. Of course, the compass would be in some way superior to this. So the compass would be superior to this because the compass uses magnets in order to use the polarity of the Earth, right, and be able to give you direction, and that was much more reliable. Astrolabe was developed by the ancient Greeks, but was very popularly used by what region? Do you know?
The Arabs?
Yeah, the Arabs in the Islamic world. Astrolabe was something that they developed and built upon the Greek technology. The compass was, of course, invented by China, very good, and that technology then spread to elsewhere in the world. Larger ship designs and sea travel. Anything come to mind for that one?
What?
Larger ship designs?
Vikings.
Not so much the Vikings. I mean, that's not really larger. The Vikings did have. You're right to mention the Vikings in general. They did have some pretty advanced ships or functional ships that could go over water, over deep water oceans, but also through rivers that were very shallow. I don't think that's necessarily what they're thinking about here, although I think that's definitely something valid to put our minds to. But what's that? Do you guys remember anybody who had really, really big ships?
The one that
Chinese
conquered China.
explorer
What's his name? Zheng He? Yeah, Zheng He.
who they thought would have maybe seen America if he kept exploring, but
Yeah, and there were some conspiracy theorists, right, who was that guy, I forget his name. They did a whole documentary about how he was sure, just positive, that China had discovered the New World, and then they just embarrassed him as he, continuously was unable to prove it. But this is maybe an exaggeration, but at least from the written records we have of Chinese junks, spelled the way you think, just like junk with an S. So it's a junk. These large ships, but massively described as having 7 masts. Some of them the largest ones. Some scholars I think debate whether that's really accurate, but I think it was at least something along these lines. Much larger than the ships that Columbus would have been sailing in. But a type of ship that also, you mentioned Columbus, the caravel was a ship that was developed among Europeans that was an important part of the Europeans trading into or exploring the New World, although that kind of leads into period 4. It's worth writing down and knowing that name, or at least having a familiarity with that name. New forms of credit and the development of money economies. So new forms of credit, there's things like the check, right? Developed in the Muslim world. I believe the Arabic word is sakk, S-A-K-K, and it became the word check. But basically a piece of paper that is like an IOU, right? You can go to, I think it's going to get into banking a little bit later, perhaps in the next one, but the idea that you can go to one institution or bank and use that as representation of wealth. You don't have to carry money along with you. And then, of course, beyond that is the actual development of paper money itself, which is developed in China. Anyone know when in China it was first developed?
Ming.
Like what dynasty? Or?
Ming Dynasty.
Not Ming Dynasty, before that. Before the Ming. After the Tang.
Song.
Huh?
Song.
Song Dynasty, yeah, if I'm not mistaken. The Tang may have messed this started a little bit, but the Song is really where it starts. And it really takes off in...
But going back to China, didn't
Yeah.
they take it from like between the bark and the wood, and then like painted it and had like a seal on it, and anyone who didn't use it would be like executed or
Yeah,
something?
wow, that stuck with you, huh?
Yeah.
Do you remember what dynasty that was during? Do you remember who you read that from? Marco.
Polo.
Right, and so what dynasty was Marco Polo traveling and visiting China, or working for China? Who do you work for? Who do you describe? And those, with all of his girlfriends. Part of that same lesson, right?
Yeah.
Who took over China? And also like a lot of everywhere else. What's the empire? The Mongols, right? So remember who was the famous ruler, Mongol ruler of China?
Kublai Khan.
Kublai Khan, right? So yeah, so that was during. So paper money did begin during the Song Dynasty, but Emma, you just explained it very well. Like the Mongols really made it a big deal in China, and at least according to Marco Polo, right? Really took that further in that idea of paper money. If I'm not mistaken, it did not last in China. I think they went back on it later on, perhaps related to the essay you guys did in the summer with the silver trade. With the influx of silver paper money, then I think, if I'm not mistaken, don't at me. I guess I'm adding myself by putting this on the internet, but that paper money was done away with for a time when the influx of silver increased dramatically in China. But why, in general, is paper money advantageous for trade?
Because it's lighter.
Lighter.
If you lose it, then it's just a piece of paper.
Well, I mean, I'm not trying to lose $100 bill, but in addition to that, it's lighter. Do you need 100 pieces of paper to represent $100?
No,
You
just
need one that has a couple extra zeros, right? So it represents wealth rather than being the item of value itself, and it's a value that's placed upon it by the people who use it. The governments, whoever's issuing that currency, have more control over it, are able to make adjustments to things. And you said it's easier to use, it's easier to hide. Certainly, you're walking around with a big bag of coins. Right? It's not very safe, and also not very functional. So paper money allows you to make some of those adjustments. I gotta get this out of here. I keep looking at the wrong paper. And you also have, the idea of loans. I don't think this is new to the period, but as banks start developing, people issue loans, right? They are interest-bearing loans that they have to pay back. That allows banks to become wealthier and grow and continue to offer more services in more places.
Wasn't that big in like Venice?
Yeah, and in Italy in general, you had you could tell from the coins, like the florins were an important point in the Middle Ages throughout Europe, and they were coming from Florence. So banking in Italy was a big deal, especially around the Renaissance time, going after that. Speaking of Europe, the Hanseatic League. So commercial growth is also facilitated by state practices, including the Inca road system. We just talked about that. Trading organizations such as the Hanseatic League, and state-sponsored commercial infrastructure such as the Grand Canal of China. Okay, so this is again kind of jumping. We're going to be jumping around, coming back to this, but I'll show you the Grand Canal. Well, I'll show you Hanseatic League first. Do you guys know what the Hanseatic League was? Is that familiar to anyone? It's not something we talked about in great detail.
Wasn't it like,
Wasn't it what?
I forgot.
Do you remember when it was, where it was, anything about that?
Mediterranean.
Not so much. So during the late Middle Ages, not during the Renaissance yet.
Guilds.
Hmm?
Is it like merchant guilds or something?
Yeah, it's all part of that same kind of conversation. We talked about trade towns and guilds and kind of the revitalization of trade during the late Middle Ages. So basically before before the plague, right, when things were starting to get better. So crazy. I want to talk about the little ice age, but that comes But you have in here, right? This is, again, we're talking about Italian merchants, right? Dominating the Mediterranean. So just kind of reconnecting with that. This is the Mediterranean Sea, trade routes and everything. Of course, it just like most trade routes, it spreads beyond that main area we're talking about, and also connects up with the other ones. Like if it's going down here, it's going to connect to Trans-Saharan trade route. If it's going this way, it's going to connect to Silk Road, Indian Ocean. Like they're all intertwined. But up here we have a different color. We have the green, and that represents the Hanseatic League. I don't know how much specific they really want you to know about it, but I guess I'll tell you that a lot of it was founded by the German crusaders who actually, during the Crusades, if you guys remember, there were a bunch of crusades, and not all of them made a ton of sense, and not a lot of them had that much to do with the Crusades. But they still called them Crusades, and one was called the Northern Crusade, where you had Teutonic knights, German knights, go up into what is today like northern Poland and the Baltic states around the Baltic Sea, and fight and try to convert the pagans to Christianity, which they were largely successful in doing. But you ended up with these kind of Germanic or German peoples living along the Baltic coast. If you remember, like when we talk about Prussia with Otto and Bismarck and stuff, right? Prussia was randomly like on Poland's head, right? And you're like, wait, what are Germans doing up by Poland? How did you get over there? Well, being German. But it's because that was the remnants of those Crusader knights who established these Germanic states. And then you have this league, the Hanseatic League, between really the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, mostly Germanic states. I guess England certainly is included in that. English is the Germanic language, with Scandinavia and northern Germany and all these regions, to have a trading league with each other, right? Have certain trade agreements, same way we have modern trade agreements. AFTA comes to mind as we're getting towards the end of the year in 10th grade. But it's a trading league where they may hook each other up and help each other out. Interestingly, this would also be a region that would eventually become Prussia once they convert to Protestantism. The Duke that ruled the region converted to Protestantism. Was he a Duke originally? He was I think a monk, and ended up leaving the Catholic Church and turning the region into a Protestant area. And the other one they mentioned was the Grand Canal, which is kind of a totally different topic. The Grand Canal, does anyone remember who built that, when, why, where, anything like that?
China.
Definitely China. Remember what dynasty it was? It's literally like the only thing they're famous for. They did this, and then that was like basically their run. Any idea? So remember the Han Dynasty in period 2, right? They collapsed, and we ended up with a period of disunion where China was divided into the Three Kingdoms period, and then a couple of other guys, and then I think there was 4 at one time. But it doesn't really all come back together until the Sui Dynasty, right? So Sui Dynasty it started in 581 CE, and you can see right below this, there's literally the Sui Dynasty right there. So if you want to jot that down there instead, or in either place. 589. The one that says 581. I have 589 in here, somewhere in that neighborhood. I guess I wrote the number wrong. But they reunite China during this period, and they do something that's really important. Pisses everybody off, and that is they create the Grand Canal. So the south of China is really agriculturally productive. It's further south. It's more fertile. The Yangtze River Valley is amazing in terms of fertility, but the north has really been the hub of Chinese society, Chinese culture, right? The earliest civilizations in China were on the Yellow River, not the Yangtze River. And China technically controls all of that, but it's two disconnected parts of China that your homework last night, tonight, definitely tonight, is going to continue this conversation of China trying to make sure that China is culturally all on the same page, right? That's in different times in Chinese history, that's been an important goal of Chinese governments, that kind of cultural uniformity to some degree or another. And this is a really effective way of doing that without having to force people, just by connecting the north and south with this canal that's getting built. Here's a picture of where the canal was built, from Beijing to Hangzhou. It's an artificial waterway that connects these two really important rivers, and obviously that's going to help with trade, that's going to help with movement, right? Just like when we talk about any kinds of roads, canals. bridges, all this kind of mobility infrastructure that makes China safer. You can move troops quickly, things like that. But it also is going to culturally connect those two regions as they trade more with each other, right? We've talked about this a million times in different places. As they trade more with each other, as they interact more, they become more culturally united and similar. But what's the downside of doing something like this?
It's expensive to dig up that.
Okay, it's expensive, which means you have to do what?
A lot of work for you going there.
So you have to raise more. You have to raise taxes. You have a lot of workers on that. Do they have like OSHA regulations back there, like workplace safety? So what's gonna happen?
They could die.
We're gonna die. So you're gonna have high taxes and a lot of deaths, and that upsets a lot of people. We have peasant revolts, and within a few decades of becoming a dynasty, they are overthrown. So they do this amazing thing that everybody is really glad it exists, but people are so upset about how it came to exist that they end up overthrowing them, and we end up with the Tang Dynasty in power, which is why I wanted to. As I said, we can go straight through, and I don't know why, unless it has something to do with this thing. The Song Dynasty is missing from this list right here. It says Sui, Tang, Yuan, and Ming. You can put a little arrow to let you know that the Song Dynasty is in between there. The expansion of empires, including China, Byzantine Empire, various Muslim states, and the Mongols, facilitated Afro-Eurasian trade and communication as new people were drawn into their conquerors' economies and trade networks. Gosh. This is very convoluted because there's so much here. So particularly in terms of trade, Sui Dynasty we mentioned already. Tang China and Song China are really important for their developments with some of these inventions, right? It's probably the thing we think of most. The developments such as gunpowder technology, compass, paper, money, printing. But Tang Dynasty is the one where we saw some of the conflicts with Buddhism as well. I don't know if we really need to mention that here. Yuan Dynasty I think is really worth mentioning because they are the Mongols, and they are part of that Pax Mongolica. So during their reign, we have this connection of China with the outside world. Confucian philosophy, which has guided China for centuries, tends to be less open to cultural diffusion. In the Ming Dynasty, we had Zheng He, right, and his voyages that after the Mongols were kicked out of China, they wanted to reassert their dominance, show off to the world that they were a powerful state, and also increase their trade, and so they started doing these voyages throughout the Indian Ocean world. But then the Chinese government, I believe in the year 1433, shut them down, right, and said, we're not doing this anymore. I'm just going over it briefly because I think it's going to come out elsewhere, but as it relates to this point, they were very resistant to that kind of cultural connection. If you remember, we did that talk show last year. It was China. Did China make the right decision to ending the voyages, right? And part of it was we don't want to be connected with the outside world. We want to keep to ourselves and maintain our own culture. And so in the early Ming Dynasty, we see a lot of that expansion and connection with trade and communication, but then kind of shuts off as well. Byzantine Empire, I think this is just a good place to just remind ourselves what the Byzantine Empire is. Where is the Byzantine Empire?
It's the
Turkey.
East Roman
East
Empire.
Roman Empire.
Eastern Roman Empire, right? So prior to the expansion of the Islamic Caliphates, it was pretty much all of what we know as Eastern Rome. Here's our Byzantine Empire. This is again pre-Islamic period. During the time of Justinian, he even tried to reconquer the ancient Roman Empire. So you can put down under leaders. Justinian is a really important leader, one of the very early leaders of the Eastern Roman Empire or Byzantine Empire. Constantinople, and he wanted to reconquer the Roman Empire. He was somewhat successful, but only temporarily. So by the time he died, he had expanded into all these territories by 585. However, shortly thereafter, within the next century or two, we have the expansion of the Islamic Caliphate. Thank you. The expansion of the Islamic Caliphate that will take over pretty much all the southerly parts of the Byzantine Empire and really just leave it for a few hundred years as basically Greece, the Balkans, and Asia Minor. That's the only places they can control. They maintain control of. But Justinian did some great important stuff. He has Justinian's Code as a highlight. As a low light, they tried to overthrow him, but I don't know if that's really in the entire story of the Byzantine Empire the most important thing. The Hagia Sophia is worth knowing in terms of their cultural achievements. This cathedral, Orthodox cathedral, later became a mosque. So for achievements. Justinian's Code was a reworking of the Roman law code. And making it more understandable, making it more functional, cleaning it up a bit. They got into some trouble by in terms of trade, it doesn't really have specifics about here for that, but I mean they were heavily involved in trade. You guys said before they controlled Constantinople, which was an important center of connection between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, which enabled them to control that trade, make money off of it. They're connected. Again, I think it's going to come up later, but they're connected with the Rus, the Vikings, and who settled in along the Dnieper River, that become mixing with the Slavic peoples, the ancestors of the Russians, the Kiev and Rus, connecting with them, connecting with other peoples along the region. They trade into the Middle East, even with people that they fight against. But they. Yeah. We'll finish this section and we'll call it there. The Lowlights during the Crusades period, we have some trouble. The Seljuk Turks are invading, right? Remember that. The Seljuk Turks are invading from. It's not the right time period on this map, but just so we can look at the placement. Invading from the Middle East and into Asia Minor, continuing closer to Constantinople. They reach out to the Pope for help, which begins the Crusades. By the Fourth Crusade, what has happened to the Byzantine Empire?
Crumbled.
Sorry?
Crumbled?
And that didn't crumble yet, but why are they regretting reaching out to the Pope? Remember the Fourth Crusade? The one with the ships?
Oh, because didn't they leave the ships, or someone there was some ships someone didn't pick up the ships.
Somebody didn't pay for their ships.
Yeah.
They ordered a bunch of ships and nobody was there to pay for them. Long story short, the Crusaders ended up attacking the Byzantine Empire, the place that actually originally asked them for help, that started the Crusades in the first place. The Crusaders were in Constantinople for a while. They had some dealings with the ruler there, and ended up not being paid what they were supposed to be paid. And in retaliation, they responded by overthrowing the government and briefly conquering the Byzantine Empire. It did get out of that, but it was not the same. It was not in great shape after that. And then about 200 or so years later, in 1453, who comes knocking? 1453. Who shows up? The Byzantines to finally take them out once and for all.
The Chaldeans.
Oh,
I don't know.
Istanbul, Constantinople, now getting a copyright violation. Fair use protection. Why did Constantinople get the works? It's nobody's business but the
Turks.
Which ones?
Seljuk.
Nope. Seljuk was earlier during the Crusades. Who conquered the Byzantine Empire? Who took over Constantinople? Istanbul was an empire for another 400 or 500 years. Huh?
Greeks.
After from 1453 until 1921, according to World War One.
Ottomans?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Forgot about these guys. They've been so present in our year this year. We forgot they were still around last year. That's right at that turning point going into period 4, right? The Byzantine Empire ends. So you can write it down in there as a low light. But we know that that's kind of right at the cusp of period 4. Islamic caliphates number 1 and number 2. The first one is the Umayyad Caliphate. Two M's or two Y's? I'm going to say two M's. Ummayyads. And the second caliphate is the Abbasids. Abbasids. The Umayyads they kind of remind me of the Chin and the Han. One is really big into like conquering and getting a lot accomplished, and the other one is more about focusing inward and making some accomplishments. So the Umayyad Caliphate conquered a tremendous amount of territory in a very short time. Pull up the picture for you guys. Here we go. This is the Umayyad Caliphate. We started off with simply this area during the lifetime of Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad, this much area was under control of this growing Muslim state. Thank you very much for that. Just parts of Arabia. By the time of what they call the first 4 caliphs, so we don't. It says Caliphate number 1 on here. We don't usually think about it because it was very brief and it wasn't very empire-y. But the Rashidun Caliphate, or the rightly guided caliphs, or first 4 caliphs, who were the actual disciples or companions of Muhammad, they started off, and even under them, those first 4 guys, you have quite a bit of conquest taking place, conquering Egypt, Persian Empire, and Egypt and Syria being part of what empire? Up until this point. Byzantine Empire, yeah. Egypt was seriously important. I didn't watch it. I just saw a YouTube video the other day about why basically Rome needed Egypt, how much they depended on Egypt, because Egypt was. What is Egypt? Huh?
Breadbasket.
That's exactly the word I was going to say. Yes, the breadbasket. Right. During period 2, we realized we don't need to actually have an empire on a river valley as long as we own a river valley somewhere. Right. We get the bread to us. So Egypt and Syria are conquered, and then the Persian Empire. But the one that we usually talk about is the Umayyad Caliphate, which conquers this entire region from Spain to the Indus River. We see Bukhara and Samarkand, right? That's the city I mentioned earlier, the Silk Road cities, right, during the Islamic period. Very important. And this region is an important region as well, Central Asia. This whole region is what they conquered. During the Abbasid Caliphate, they actually a bit smaller. They're actually smaller than the Abbasid Caliphate, but they do a lot more within their empire because they focus internally. They're less racist. They're less. The Umayyads have a bad reputation for being Arab supremacists, even though it's not a very Islamic thing to do. And during the Abbasid Caliphate, they were more open to outside cultures besides the Arabs, particularly the Persians. They had a strong Persian influence. And we see here, this is really when the Islamic Golden Age really gets going. And I don't think this is the place to talk about that because I'm sure we're going to have a lot more spots on here to discuss that. But I think we can mention that as a general thing to know about the Abbasid Caliphate is their achievements. The Mongols, just real quick before we end for today. The Mongol Empire, who was the most famous leader of the Mongols?
Genghis Khan.
Genghis Khan, your boy Genghis Khan, also known as the universal conqueror, the universal ruler, I should say. And pull up the map for this one as well. I know exactly the map to pull up. The beautiful moving map that shows us the expansion of the state. So the Mongol Empire, the first leader was Genghis Khan or Genghis Khan. Other leaders, Kublai Khan, who you mentioned before, and some of the other sons and grandsons, Lagu and over that. Where was it? Everywhere. The largest contiguous land empire in history, but largely throughout Asia. Much of Asia was conquered by this, and bits even going into Europe as well, into Ukraine. It has achievements, the Pax Mongolica, just in general, the massive spread of culture that took place during that period, the connection between China, the Middle East, something that, not to say that wasn't happening before, but the Mongols tying all those places together really helps to facilitate that cultural fusion. Of course, some of the technology that they employed, which was not unique to them, but they probably did it better than anyone else. Pew pew pew. Right. The bow and the stirrup in combination important among nomadic peoples in in the Eurasian steppe that they really utilize better than probably anybody else. And then the ability to adapt to other technologies like using catapults and things like that to attack China and take over. So highlights, they had the largest empire ever. In China, you already mentioned the paper money thing. But lowlights is they were not able to conquer certain areas. They failed to conquer Egypt, they failed to conquer Western Europe, and ultimately they broke apart. They didn't have some. In some ways, their positives also negative. One thing that's nice about the Mongols, as a nomadic people, they're smaller group who actually do the running of things, and so they tend to be more open, flexible, tolerant. Not because they believe tolerance is the right thing to do, but because it's just a more effective way of ruling. And if you're already doing it, you could say you're a nice person. That's not usually the reason we do it. Google government cheese. Watched an interesting thing on that the other day about how America in the 80s was giving out a lot of free cheese to people. And they said we're just trying to be nice, trying to give people cheese, but it was because America, the government subsidizes dairy farmers, and they had all this extra milk, and they were going to just dump it out. So why don't we turn it into cheese and give it to people? So very often when the governments do things and it says, oh, we're doing something of the kindness of our heart, very often they have their own reason for doing it, just happens to conveniently also be a nice thing to do, and then they go, that's why we did it, because we're so nice. And that's very often the case when it comes to tolerance. You might be tolerant because it's just more effective, not because it's the nice thing to do. And they broke apart, and they didn't last actually all that long. They lasted only 100 years or so. And also killed a lot of people. I guess that would be a low light, right? They were pretty vicious conquerors. I always say, we don't. If the Mongols were around today, we would probably think of them like ISIS, but way worse. I mean, they're taking over half the world. If this was on the news, if there was a group of people that took over half of the world, we would be absolutely horrified, and we would not be like, oh, they're so cool, they're so interesting, like the Mongols. We'd be like, oh my God, this is so terrifying. I'm in absolute fear for my life. We need to go somewhere and hide, right? So that's a low end, I guess. We'll end here today. We got through some key stuff. Like I said, there's a lot more in this packet, but a lot of it is going to overlap with things we've already talked about. You see, the Incas are here again, the Mongols are here again, Tang China is here again. So I think when we go through the rest of the packet, it's going to be like, what have we not covered about each of those things? Arabs and Berbers adapting to camels. We already talked about that. So we did a lot more today than it looks like on the packet, and I think that'll hopefully, as we go through next on Friday, hopefully you guys will be here. I think we'll be able to see that pan out. But that's it for today, guys. Thank you for being here, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Enjoy your homework as well.